Hi, my name is Davin Michelson. I'm with Intertech Training, and for this presentation I'm going to talk about developing ASP.NET AJAX custom controls. Specifically, I'm going to talk about how I can go ahead and create those controls using, of course, the AJAX library, ASP.NET, JavaScript. There's a lot that's actually involved in creating custom ASP.NET AJAX controls. I gave this presentation at Microsoft in December, and I also gave it virtually that same day. And it was interesting to talk to other people to see how much they were using the AJAX framework, how they're using the AJAX control toolkit, how they're using custom JavaScript programming. And I didn't get much feedback as to how many people are creating custom controls, and I think that's due to the complexity of them. However, you and I, as ASP.NET developers, are going to have to get more skilled at creating these custom controls, and that is also going to require us to have a lot of different skills, specifically with working with JavaScript, .NET Framework, and things of that nature. Okay, a little bit about myself. I'm a certified trainer, and I've been working with Intertech for almost 5 years now. Before that, I worked at another training facility. Notice that I got the MCSD, MCPD. I got a bunch of certifications, kind of a junkie on this measure here. And I do have my email address up there as well, davin@intertech.com. I wanted to keep it simple, just in case anybody ever wants to contact me. I do love to hear from students, find out what they're working on, and any questions they have about Microsoft technology specifically. I have my own website. My brother and I actually run this site. It's called mndeveloper.com, MN for Minnesota, obviously. And I've got a blog there as well, although the blog will be moving over to Intertech's website. So I'll just keep my personal blog there, and I'll have my Intertech blog. I teach several different classes at Intertech. I can teach the ASP.NET, AJAX, VB, C#.NET. I also cover some UML with object-oriented analysis and design. Beginning programming is always a blast. And some SQL Server courses as well. I love working with Microsoft technologies. As my brother says, I drank the Kool-Aid. So anyways, it's a lot of cool technologies I teach, and I hope you guys get something out of this little presentation. Background, I have been developing professionally since 1994. I've had more experience developing software as a programmer than as an instructor. I've developed web apps since 1998 using many different technologies, Perl, ColdFusion, PHP, and of course classic ASP script, and of course ASP.NET. ASP.NET right now is actually going through some changes. We've gotten used to programming web forms since 2002 with the release of Visual Studio 2002. And MVC is going to be taking a lot stronger foothold when the next release of Visual Studio comes out next year. I believe it's March 22nd. They're going to release Visual Studio 2010. I've given some presentations over at TechEd and in the .NET user group and Visual Studio Team System user group that's run by Intertech. Thanks a lot, though, for logging on, and like I said, I hope you get something out of this presentation. Like I said, this presentation was given live in person, and I'm just redoing it here for the virtual world, or for the recorded world. Slides will be available at this web address. You can download the PDF right now, actually, and that'll be for this presentation right here. And of course, we're making the recorded presentation. That's what you're listening to right now. The agenda. Well, here's what we're going to cover. First things first, just for everybody's benefit, I'm going to talk about how the ASP.NET AJAX framework works, how this framework works, and for creating specialized web applications that have client-side technology and server-side technology. I'm also going to talk about the AJAX Control Toolkit, which are some awesome controls which can add AJAX functionality to our sites. And of course, the two different types of controls that we have, which are controls and extenders, which actually modify existing controls behavior. I'll also talk about the AJAX client library. This is a set of JavaScript library files that Microsoft has written that we should be taking advantage of as developers, enabling us to have object-oriented programming on the client side, making it much easier to create applications. I'll also talk about creating custom AJAX controls, specifically prerequisites with skills. What skills do you need to create these custom controls? Then we'll talk about the actual AJAX control that we can create, and the extender controls as well, the difference between those two, and some of the functions we're going to use. We'll also take a look at some example code for those. And I have no problem at all. Let's just take a look at Visual Studio 2010. Now, at the time that you're creating this presentation, Visual Studio 2010 is in beta 2, and that's what I currently have installed on my machine. And I'll talk about how Ajax, MVC, and some other things like jQuery, for example, are part of .NET 4.0 that's going to be released in March. Finally, I'll talk about the custom controls, my last thoughts of what it is about creating these custom controls, and some basic opinion. You take it or leave it. Now, first things first, Ajax programming makes ASP.NET programming easier, specifically with the JavaScript. It speeds up the performance of our applications. For example, you can make a request of a server and update a small portion of a page instead of constantly posting the entire page and all the controls to the server, having all the events be raised on Havel on the server side, recreating all the controls with their current state, and sending it all back to the client. That's why we like to use Ajax programming. Now with ASP.NET Ajax, that of course will write all the necessary JavaScript for us automatically. We don't instead have to use that XML HTTP request object that normal Ajax programmers must use. For example, one of the upcoming classes we do have in Intertech is going to be called Complete Ajax, and in that course we spend a fair amount of time talking about how to program the XML HTTP request object. Admittedly, if you want the most control for doing Ajax programming, you should stick with that object. That just makes the most sense. However, take advantage of some of this Ajax controls that are part of the framework. This can actually save you a lot of JavaScript programming. Now, something else I should mention here is that when Microsoft released the Ajax framework, it was originally codenamed Atlas, and it was a special add-on for Visual Studio 2005. Now, Visual Studio 2005 was, of course, released with .NET 2.0, and if you installed this special add-on, this Atlas framework or Ajax framework, that, of course, added a couple of DLLs that needed to be installed into the GAC, and, of course, they also need to be deployed on your web server if you're going to take advantage of this. And of course, the whole idea was Microsoft promised, hey, when .NET 3.5 comes out with Visual Studio 2008 on the exact same day, we're going to have the Ajax framework built right into it. And sure enough, it is. In .NET 3.5, which is really 2.0 with a few extra DLLs, mind you, in .NET 3.5, one of those extra DLLs is support for Ajax, besides support for the W's, WPF, WCF, WF, and of course, LINQ, which is built into the compilers. Now, one of the problems is some developers and some, especially larger enterprises, went ahead and said, yeah, we're going to go ahead and upgrade to Visual Studio 2008 because it gives us much better support for JavaScript programming as far as IntelliSense and catching errors and debugging. However, we're going to stay on .NET 2.0. Well, that's one of the big advantages of Visual Studio 2008 and the newer versions, is that you can choose which version of .NET you want to support, looking backwards. So for example, you could easily create a .NET 2 web application using Visual Studio 2008. Well, here's where the problem comes into the versioning nightmare here, that third bullet point. If you're still on .NET 2.0, even though you are using Visual Studio 2008, how do you use the 1.0 version of the Ajax framework? Well, they have that special hybrid add-on that I've got listed there in the third bullet point, where it basically states that 1.0 for Visual Studio 2008 can be installed, and that of course will work with .NET 2.0. This is assuming, since you're using .NET 2.0, Ajax is not part of it. Now, as far as a demo here, something I wanted to mention and show you guys is just a very simple way that we can do an Ajax style application without having to deal with the XML HTTP request object. So what I'm going to do is navigate over to Visual Studio here, and let me close all my current windows. Here we go. What I'm going to do with this little website, you can see I'm dealing with a website, and it is a .NET 3.5 website. I just want to take advantage of Ajax, and as you guys are going to see, of course, the Ajax controls are automatically available in the toolbox because I am on .NET 3.5. I'm going to go ahead and add a brand new web page to this website, and notice it's going to be called default4.aspx. This will be the language of my code behind file, C#, and I'll just go ahead and click Add. Now, right off the bat, I'm looking at the source code view. You can see I've got the form, I've got the div tags, and over on the left side, I have these Ajax extensions over at the top. And of course, something that I must always put onto a page whenever I'm doing Ajax programming is a script manager control. So I'm just going to drag and drop him just inside the actual form, like that. I'm going to blow away the div tags. I don't need those guys. But something else I want to put on here is an actual update panel. Okay. Now the update panel, any controls I put inside of this update panel will automatically do AJAX behavior when calling methods that are existing in the code behind file. Now there's a bug within this update panel that you need to be aware of. I always like to point this out to my students. For example, if I just go ahead and drag and drop a button control inside this update panel, it's not going to work. Watch out for this bugaboo. Drag and drop a button right into the update panel. Notice that, first off, this control doesn't have an ID. It doesn't have an ID attribute like the update panel does, or this guy here. Every control in an ASP.NET web page must have a unique ID. Also, it doesn't have some of the other properties we might be used to seeing. Well, here's what you must do. Before you go dragging and dropping a button control into there, it must have this special content template element. And inside of here is where you can go ahead and drag a button and a text box. Now, before I go ahead and add some controls into this update panel, I'm going to show you the behavior of a standard ASP.NET web page that's not making use of any AJAX. So I'll drag and drop a button control onto the form. Notice it has a nice ID and everything. And I'll drag and drop a label control onto the form as well. And based on the user clicking on this button, I'm going to go ahead and set the label equal to the current time. So I'll just drag it or double click the button control, and I'll say label1.text equals datetime.now.tolong time string, like that. Makes sense? Now when I go ahead and view this in a browser, I'll go ahead and save the changes, of course. And I'm going to shrink it down a little bit in size. You can see that when I click on the button, it's going ahead and updating it with the current time. Did you notice this green scroll bar going across the bottom? Right there in the status bar. That snake is going across every single time because it's having to regenerate the entire page at the server side. Albeit, all we have is a button and a label control, or really what we have is an HTML input control with another input control. But mind you, at the server side, there's a lot going on. Remember, we're going through IIS's authentication and authorization process. We're jumping in ASP.NET and its own authentication and authorization. We're recreating the entire page object. And of course, page inherits from control and web control. We're handling all those different events, and all the different controls get to subscribe to those events. And then they get to render out all the HTML, and then we're resetting all the actual state of the controls using view state as well, and then finally sending that entire generated page back off to the client as HTML for the browser to render once again. That's why this is so expensive, right? Having to go ahead and recreate this entire page every time. But if I move those two controls inside of that update panel, if I move this button control and this label inside the update panel, you're going to see how the performance goes up dramatically. So I'll just go ahead and select these three controls, cut, and then paste so that they're inside of my update panel. Boy, the indentation is really sad. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this little button here that says format the whole document. There we go. That looks nice and pretty now. Alright, save all and view this in the browser once again. And it looks the same as it did before, but one thing you'll notice is you don't see that green snake going cruising across the bottom of my status bar. The progress bar is no longer appearing because now a very simple request is going out from the client to the server side using a special object called the XML HTTP request object, the one AJAX object. Remember, next time you're at a bookstore or a library or wherever and you're looking at a bunch of books and you see a whole mess of them on AJAX programming, remember that all those AJAX programming books are based on that one solitary object. And he only has a few different methods and properties that you're going to use for AJAX programming, making requests or posts to the server. So this is how we can take advantage of ASP.NET AJAX without having to really write any custom JavaScript, which is awesome. It really saves us a ton of time. And of course, all those scripts are automatically sent to the client side. Well, they're not actually included in the page, but instead the page references those scripts. And when you actually take a look at the source code, when you do view source from your browser, you'll notice that we're actually calling this special AXD handler, webresource.axd. And then we see all these goofy characters here which are referring to that exact script which is needed. Notice that we have different scripts that are being downloaded and included within the web page's memory, or the browser's memory if you will. So these of course are being requested from the server at runtime by calling a special handler, and then that actually includes all the source code for doing the AJAX requests of the server side. Okay. Keeps our web page pretty neat and clean. We don't have a ton of JavaScript here. Alright, so that's a very simple example showing us ASP.NET AJAX using the AJAX control tools. Now, of course, there's something called the AJAX Control Toolkit. Oftentimes when I teach AJAX, I also talk about the free control toolkit, which is entirely open source, free from Microsoft. A lot of it has been written by the developers at Microsoft, but some of it has also been developed by the open developer community. Those who are creating some solutions for free and then submitting them to the Codeplex site. If you haven't been to Codeplex yet, you should definitely check it out. Codeplex.com is a site for any developer or teams of developers to submit free solutions in whether it be .NET or what language, whatever language you want and that you'd like to share with others. Now, one of the sites here you can see is the AJAX Control Toolkit.codeplex.com. Here you can go ahead and download the AJAX Control Toolkit in either JavaScript format. Also, you can download the actual source code in .NET or all of it all together. Depends on if you actually want the source code so you can debug it or even make modifications yourself. That's one of its biggest strengths, is because it's entirely written in open source, you can go ahead and make modifications. Like, hey, I really like this one control, but I want to make changes to it. You can certainly go ahead and do that. You can make changes to those controls and you own them then. Now, they just updated the AJAX Control Toolkit just in September 30th, 2009, and they even added a couple of new controls. For example, one of them, that async file upload, can actually load files from the client to the server while also maintaining the page as something that the user can interact with instead of locking it and having the user wait for the upload to complete. Another really cool control that you definitely have to check out is Seadragon, and I'll talk about that shortly. Seadragon, of course, allows us to do these deep dives, these views of these images, all with a mouse button or with the cursor keys on the keyboard, allowing us to actually zoom in on certain pictures. Feedback from users, this is a sad part. Although the AJAX Control Toolkit has been around for a long time and they do continue to make several different updates to it and upload those latest changes, users still say that some of it is still buggy or new bugs have since been introduced in September 30th. Take a look at the users' feedback on the Codeplex site on anything you see. That's one thing that's really cool, is everything is open source, but also users are free to state whatever they want. Like on this latest version of the AJAX Control Toolkit, some of the actual people have said, you know what, I'm going back to an older version because this one had less bugs in it. Just to give you a little example of what we have here, I'm going to go look at default.aspx. So if I go here, here's my website too, and if I take a look at default.aspx, you can see that I'm taking advantage of some of the controls that are in the AJAX Control Toolkit. First off, notice in my bin folder, I've got the AJAX Control Toolkit.dll located right here. Now this was automatically added when I dragged and dropped one of these AJAX controls from the toolbox to the actual web page. Now I'm just going to go ahead and show you all the controls that come free with the AJAX Control Toolkit. You can see here I created a separate tab in my toolbox called the AJAX Control Toolkit. And what I did was I right-clicked it and said choose items. And then I actually browsed to that particular DLL. Now that DLL might have been located somewhere else at first. But when I did, and I actually chose that DLL, all these controls appeared right here in my toolbox. Notice, for example, I've got the Seadragon I mentioned, combo box, numeric up-down extender, a slider extender. Here's a full-blown editor. And anytime I drag one of these controls onto the web page, a couple of things are going to happen. First off, if the DLL is not in the bin folder yet, it's going to be added. Something else that's very important is up at the very top of the web page, you're going to see this register directive. And this register directive here is going to register that particular namespace for whatever control that you add. Notice also it sets up a tag prefix and then the namespace. Now down here I've got my required script manager control that I must always have for any Ajax page. You can only have one and only one of those guys on your page. I've got a standard button control, and notice he just called button 1, and there's his ending tag. Okay, well, something else I wanted to throw on here was something called the confirm button extender. Now this is one of the controls that's over here in the actual control toolkit, the confirm button extender. And of course, here he is. It's this guy right here. Now if I actually select this control and go to the property window, you'll notice there's some important properties I can set off of this guy. For example, what this button is supposed to do, the confirm button extender, is that if the user actually clicks the button, it's going to do a little JavaScript on the client side confirming that they really did actually want to click that button. For example, let's say you had a huge form for like an auto loan or something, and the user enters a bunch of information into the actual form, filling in all these different text boxes. If they actually click on the button, you can prompt them saying, hey, are you sure that this application is filled out correctly? You know, what if the button was actually a clear button that blew away everything that was in all the text boxes? Again, it can do that confirm. So that's why we have some confirmed text here. We can ask, hey, are you really freaking sure, right? We can go ahead and ask that, and if they say yes, because it'll be a yes/no modal dialog box, then it'll actually post back to the server. Note that we also set the target control ID. Now keep in mind, this is one of the extender controls. You see, some of the controls in the toolbox are extender controls, and some are full-blown controls themselves. An extender control is entirely designed to modify the behavior of an existing control, and this one, of course, is modifying the behavior of the button control. Here's another example right here. You see that we have a text box here, and a label above it says, hey, pick a date. No big deal, right? Well, normally a user would have to manually type in a date, but maybe you want to be in a little bit more control of exactly how they enter that date information. With a calendar extender, it'll actually show them a full-blown calendar, and they can just go ahead and click on a calendar, choose a date, and have it automatically updated into that text box. Again, notice the calendar extender specifies which text box it is actually modifying. So that's pretty cool. So what I'm going to do here, I go to Design View, and this guy right here, by the way, who's not an extender, this is actually the editor control that's in our toolbox here, CC2. And notice that all he has an ID, run it equals server, wham, we have a full-blown editor that we can use. Pretty cool. Anyways, let's go ahead and view this thing in a browser here just to show you some of the behavior of these controls. So here's a button control, and if I click on the button, notice we are getting that JavaScript to run on the client side. Are you really freaking sure? If I hit cancel, you'll notice it doesn't post to the server. However, if I click OK, all of a sudden you get the green scroll bar at the bottom. It did actually post it to the server. I don't even need an event handler. I don't on the server side. I'm just showing you that it is going to post to the server. How about picking a date? If I go ahead and click on this to pick a date, look at that. I get a full-blown calendar that appears. And keep in mind that a lot of these extender controls, as well as the regular controls, are completely configurable from the property window. And of course, this editor, well, I might have some text. This is some text, right? This is terrible typing. This is some text. You know, make something bold and italicize and underline, right? And it's a really neat editor that you can go ahead and work with. That's included, right? So this just shows us how we can use some of these controls that are in the toolbox here. And of course, when you download the Ajax Control Toolkit, you also get a full-blown sample website demonstrating the possibilities of all these different controls. Seadragon, by the way, as I said, allows you to zoom in on images, and there's a lot of different examples already available on the web. You can go ahead and Bing it, if you will, or Google it, the Seadragon term, and you'll find several different websites. Now keep this in mind, when you're doing this Seadragon, there's two different ways that we can do this. We can do this with the Ajax Control Toolkit, specifically using the Seadragon control, or there's also a Silverlight version, and that one is of course called Deep Zoom. The key to having this whole Seadragon thing work is to take whatever image you have it as detailed as possible, of course, so that people will be able to zoom in and see something useful, and then create a DZI version of it. In other words, you'll have to create a special XML version of it using a DZI file. And of course, there's different websites, and also included with the control, you can actually go ahead and create this DZI file yourself. For example, if I go to just seadragon.com right now, right from my PowerPoint presentation, you can see it brought me up to this one page here showing us the image, Welcome to Seadragon, and you'll notice that Nicely Done is ridiculously small in the center here. But if I just click on it with my mouse and continue to click on it, you can see how I'm able to actually zoom in and actually see the details of the letters. Just ridiculous zooming. Also keep in mind I can make it full screen if I want, right? And I can also go back to the original size. And there's a lot of different examples here, of course. For example, I like this cool bicycle one. And then being able to zoom right in to the actual fork. Right? You can drag and drop as well, just to see what's going on here. It's just amazing how you can zoom in. And this, of course, is all part of Seadragon. This is going to be another large feature that I think is going to be one of the things that everybody's going to want to implement in their websites, especially if they have any kind of graphics at all. People like to zoom in. I can also see in the future people are going to want additional capabilities. Like I want a screenshot of a portion of that zoom in, if you will, or do something else with that information. Check out Seadragon. Like I said, this is going to be another big thing that a lot of people are going to be doing this next year. Now, one thing that Microsoft is currently working on right now is the ASP.NET AJAX library. Now, you might be thinking, what is this? Isn't this just like the AJAX library we saw before? Well, no, the AJAX add-on, which gave us AJAX functionality in .NET 2.0, was one thing, giving us some client-side scripts and some server-side controls. But the AJAX library here, what we're talking about, is something that's currently in beta. The AJAX library actually is the combination of all of the functionality that we might need for doing ASP.NET AJAX programming. It's going to include all the necessary JavaScript files, such as the AJAX JavaScript library. It's going to include the AJAX Control Toolkit, something I just demonstrated a little bit ago. It's also going to include jQuery. jQuery, which is an awesome JavaScript library that Microsoft did not write, gives us easy access to all the different controls just based on their ID, and we can go ahead and manipulate them, very much like CSS. And it also gives us support for ASP.NET and MVC, Model View Controller sites. Now this ASP.NET AJAX library current version is 0911. This is the beta version. It is not complete, but there's a lot you can go ahead and download and play around with. For example, I'm just going to go ahead and minimize all my windows here. And I'm going to take a look at my the folder here for the ASP.NET AJAX beta library. Notice inside of here, for example, I've got a README doc and a license.txt, and I've got scripts. Now if I open up scripts, you're going to see all the different AJAX library files. And something you might think of is like, wow, there's a lot of AJAX libraries. Yeah, there are a lot of JavaScript client-side stuff here. Originally when AJAX was released, when it was codenamed Atlas, there was only 3 files. There was Microsoft Ajax.js, there was Microsoft Ajax Forms, and I think there was one for the timer as well, Microsoft Ajax Timer. Now, of course, they've added a lot of other JavaScript libraries that we can go ahead and take advantage of. Now, mind you, there's 2 versions of every one of these scripts. So, I mean, like looking at this, wow, there's from this guy all the way down to this guy. Hey, that's 34 items, as it says down there on the left side. Well, really, that means there's 17 scripts, all right, which is still a heck of a lot, but it's not like 34, right? Notice, like I said, there's 2 for every script. Like here, for example, here's Ajax Timer.debug.js, and then there's Ajax Timer.js. Just so you know that the Microsoft Ajax Timer.js version has been minified. Yes, minified, meaning that all the spaces have been taken out of it. All the comments have been stripped out of it. Any unnecessary code has been stripped out of it, making it a much smaller file. For example, notice the size of this guy is 3 kilobytes, right? And look at the one above it, the debug version. Hey, that's 6 kilobytes. That one has all the comments and all the white space. That's the human readable one. That, of course, is going to be larger, and that's the one when you do JavaScript debugging that you would actually step into. So we have a debug version of a JavaScript file and we have a regular version. For example, let me go ahead and open up this debug version. I'll go ahead and just click on Edit, and this is bringing it up in Notepad, although I could bring it up in Visual Studio or whatever. But you notice how we have some very easy to read function, execute, the name of the file. We've got comments in here, right? And other things as well. But it's all readable, and if I'm debugging this, I might step into one of these functions line by line. I can also search and basically just learn about what this thing does. Notice here's where we're actually registering the class at sys.ui._timer, and of course registering the script altogether. Hey, this is pretty easy to read. Now you may be thinking, well, I don't know much about JavaScript. For maybe some of you folks, you don't know about JavaScript, and this is not that easy to read at all. But try to compare that guy to this guy here. Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to learn anything from this, right? This is a real mess. So this has been minified, which I'll talk about shortly. And of course, there's other JavaScript files here as well, and this is all part of the ASP.NET Ajax library, which is in beta. Now, if I go into Extended, here's where I'm going to go ahead and find all of those Ajax control toolkits, right? You can see, for example, I can see the C-Dragon, the slideshow, tabs, and some of the other controls that we do have. There's a calendar control. We've also got ASP.NET Ajax beta samples, and inside of here you've got a full-blown website which gives you an example of how to use these things. So this is something else that we do have, all part of the Ajax library that anybody can download for free. It's all completely open source, and you can use on your website. Now, one thing to keep in mind with all those JavaScript files, it gets a little confusing, like, well, how do I include them in my site? How many files do I actually need? Where am I going to download them? Do I always have to worry about deploying those to my server? Well, thankfully, Microsoft's come up with this new deployment concept called the Ajax Content Delivery Network, CDN. The Ajax Content Delivery Network will actually allow your web page to download the actual JavaScript files from servers that are going to be located all over the world. And these, of course, will be cached on these servers. There's going to be both the debug versions and the full-blown versions, so you can even debug your JavaScripts as you're using them from these other locations. Note here in the example, for example, let's say we go to the head section of a web page and we add a script tag to an ASPX or HTML web page. And notice how we're saying, hey, go to this site, ajax.microsoft.com/Ajax beta 0911 and start.js. This will automatically download it to your page, and then you no longer have to worry about including all these JavaScript files in your web, on your web server, for example. This can only make deployment easier and also optimize the downloading of these files. For example, if your website is a long ways away from wherever that client is located, know that at least the JavaScript files will be downloaded at a much closer level, okay, a closer location on the planet, if you will. So this is pretty cool. We're going to have this Ajax Content Delivery Network being used. Now, as I said, I used this term once. I want you guys to get used to this term if you haven't already used it. It's called minifying. Minifying is the process of taking those JavaScript files, those beautiful JavaScript files that you may have written or maybe Microsoft's written or somebody, and bringing them down to a smaller size. Now, I got 4 bullet points here why you'd want to do this. It says compact your JavaScript files for. These are 4 reasons why you'd want to take advantage of minification, using a specific minifier. Now, I'm also going to demonstrate how we can use the one that Microsoft wrote. They already have a minifier written. But keep in mind there are several minifiers available on the web, and you certainly don't have to use Microsoft's minifier. I'll show you some reasons why you might want to do that, though. Basically, when you minimize or minify your JavaScript files, it's going to give you higher performance in the web browser. And the reason it's going to get higher performance is you're eating up less memory in the web browser. It's going to be able to download those JavaScript files faster because they're half the size. And of course, ultimately, this means less bandwidth usage between a client and a server. Believe it or not, less bandwidth usage, of course, it means nicer times for that user on a dial-up, but also for your web server. It doesn't have to sit there and handle this response going back to the client for such a long period of time. Now, when you use a minifier such as Microsoft's Ajax minifier, of course, you can see that it handles either normal crunching or hyper crunching, right? Normal crunching is just going to remove the white space, carriage return line feeds, comments, semicolons, curly braces, but you can also set it up to do hyper crunching. And this is where it's going to strip out unreachable code, maybe code is never going to be called. It'll rename your variables to shorter names. It just takes it to a whole new level. Now I'm going to demo this minifier that's from Microsoft here shortly, and know that there is a command line utility. You can go ahead and run it from the old DOS prompt. All right. Alternatively, if you're using MS Build or maybe using NANT, you can also use that instead. If you've ever looked at MS Build and looked at NANT, you're going to realize, wow, they're very, very, very similar to each other. It's almost like MS Build ripped off from NANT. And maybe they did, maybe they didn't. You can take a look and make your own decision. Also note that there's DLLs there that you can programmatically go ahead and use this Microsoft minifier as well. If for some reason you have custom tasks or you need to programmatically strip down the size of your JavaScript files. Take a look at that code example there at the bottom. You just type in ajaxmin.exe, myscript.debug.js, and then the output file name, myscript.js. Notice how I'm converting a debug version of that script into a regular version. That's an O, by the way, where I do the -O. That's not a 0. Now, one thing I found really weird is when I installed this Ajax Min, because anybody can download it and install it, is it put it in a really funky location. Alright? So, for example, under Program Files, you can see I have a folder here called the Microsoft Ajax Minifier. I think this is actually the wrong path. I think I want to go to just Program Files. Let's try again. Yeah, that's not working out. Let's try this. Microsoft. Alright. Anyways, under Program Files, let me just go ahead and run a special bat file here, guys. I thought I'd show you something, but I created a special bat file called min.bat. And you notice I'm taking the current path, and then I'm pointing to a folder called Microsoft, and then the Microsoft Ajax Minifier. Okay? Notice, yeah, I had the right path up here all along. Anyways, they went ahead and installed themselves under a folder called Microsoft under Program Files. No other application is installed there except the minifier. So what I did was, with my little bat file, I just went ahead and added it to the current path. That way I could exist anywhere and go ahead and use this minifier. So I'll just go ahead and run min.bat, and sure enough, at the very end of my path here, you can see how it includes that path to the Ajax minifier. Now what I need is a JavaScript file. And here we go. I've got this JavaScript file, 166,000 bytes in size, mass edit behavior. It's one of the JavaScript files. I just went ahead and grabbed one of them and threw it in the root of my folder here. So I'm going to go ahead and call Ajax min, and then I'll say mass edit behavior.debug.js -O for output, and then I'll call it mass edit behavior, and I'll get rid of the word debug. So it's just going to be mass edit behavior.js. It says crunching file, and then it says done. If I do a dir for masked, actually I'm going to do a dir mask star, and you can see that I have a backup, of course, here, but let me just do a dir star.js. Here we go. You can see that the mass edit behavior.debug.js is 166,000 in size, and the mass edit behavior.js is now 88. And if I go ahead and type those out just to look at them, here's the mass edit behavior.debug.js. Well, let's do that with this guy. We'll just type him out. And you can see all the spaces have been stripped out, and it has been minified. And it's like, okay, got to get used to this word minify, right? You'd want to use the word minimize, I know, but minify is what we use. Minimize means to absolutely cut it down to the absolute smallest way possible, whereas minify just means to make smaller. It's a word that already exists. I checked it out. They didn't make it up for this. Alright, so let's see where I was. Here we go. Okay, now if we're going to do Ajax programming on the client side, or on the server side and the client side, we're going to need targets on the server side. What are we actually going to call from the client? For example, we could call ASHX handler files. A lot of developers, in ASP.NET may not even take advantage of these special page handlers or these handlers that you can create, the .ashx files. In your website, you always have the ability, where's my Solution Explorer window? There we go, to create yourself a handler. Just right-click the website or web application project, choose Add New Item, and choose to create a page handler, right? So for example, it would be an ASHX file here, client library, page handler is what we usually call them. It's jumping right at me here. Here we go, a generic handler. When you go ahead and add one of these to your site, this could be a target for your particular AJAX calls to the server. Keep in mind that a handler is much lighter weight than a full-blown web page. A web page, of course, has to handle all those events, recreate all the controls on the page, and then send all that HTML back to the client to be rendered. But instead with a handler, you basically have one method, process request, and working with the response object, you choose exactly what should be emitted back to the client. And this might be a more efficient way for your AJAX calls to go into the server side from the client. Handler.ashx. Alternatively, something else you may want to take advantage of is a page method. Now, page method looks a lot like a web service. If you've ever created a web service in ASP.NET, a web service is typically an ASMX file, and then you expose some public methods that have the web method attribute placed above them. Well, with a page method, you do this in your code behind file. For example, let's take a look at page method example right here. On the design view here, you notice that I've got getTime, which is a standard input button, and I've got WC getTime. So I've got these two different buttons here. This top one here is just an HTML control, and you notice on the HTML control it just says getTime, and it's going to call this method on the JavaScript called alertTime. That's this guy right here. It's going to go ahead and call this method, and you notice we actually go to the page methods class and call this static method getTime. This is what's declared in the code behind file. Also notice we specify a couple of other JavaScript functions, timeComplete and timeError. These guys are going to run depending on success or failure with calling this page method. So I'm calling getTime here. Let me show you that. Right here I have that method called getTime. Now this is a very important requirement with page methods. It must be declared as static, and of course you must have this web method attribute placed directly above it. Also note that your static methods do not have access to any of the other controls that might be on the page, or specifically their state, because those are instance level variables, if you will. For example, when a button is added to a form, it's added as a protected control, added to the control collection of the entire page. With a page method, you're not dealing with state. So here we're just going ahead and returning the current time back as a string. Now back over on the page, whether it be a standard HTML button or a web control button on client click, notice how we're using the on client click event to do the same thing, it's going to go ahead and run and do a very simple alert with the result. Of course, if there's an error, it's going to display that instead. Now there is one additional requirement if you ever use page methods, and this is an easy one to overlook. Remember the script manager? Anytime we're doing any form of AJAX programming, we have to add that one and only one script manager on our page. We do have to set this enable page methods attribute equal to true. Once you enable this, then you can go ahead and call a page method in your code behind file. This may be a more efficient way of just exposing a few simple methods to your AJAX client-side code. They can go ahead and call this method in your code behind file without having to add a whole nother ASMX file with a bunch of web methods inside of it. If you just need to do some very simple work on the client side, get some state information or whatever, then you can go ahead and call your static method in your code behind file. Okay. Something else to consider, hey, web services or WCF services, this is another way that we can go ahead and call on the server side from our AJAX clients. These are just different types of targets that we can call. Or REST. REST is especially important. It stands for representation state transfer. Instead of constantly calling a web service which bangs against your database, Maybe you actually want to have that data already prepared and waiting on the server, and then based on what's in the actual query string, what's in the URL, you can automatically send the data back as raw text. REST, of course, gives you higher performance on the server side and on the client side because it doesn't have to generate all that data at once, right in the middle of the request and the response process. It does it all at once, saving a ton of time. And something that's important to note is that in .NET 4.0, or even now in .NET 3.5, if you have Service Pack 1 installed, we have these things in the global.asax file. Let me open up that. I don't think I have it in this one here. Where we can actually take in the requests, and based on their location, we can go ahead and send them to a certain area. And I guess what I should do is just show you that in an MVC application. This is Visual Studio 2010, by the way. And if I go ahead and choose to create a brand new project or website, actually it has to be a project for MVC. Here we go, MVC2 web application. I'll click OK. Create a unit test for it. You'll notice that I have a global.asax, and this is something that was added with .NET 3.5 Service Pack 1. The ability to go ahead and choose routing. Routing is the capability of looking at the actual query as it's coming in and mapping it to a specific class. And with routing, you can take advantage, of course, of creating a REST solution. Routing being able to see, oh, you're looking for this bits of information, go ahead and send them back this information that's on the server. Okay. Other server-side targets, keep in mind you might be dealing with other technologies altogether. One of the things that I've taught in the past when we were working with Ajax is that the server side doesn't matter for Ajax as much as the client side, unless you're specifically doing ASP.NET Ajax programming. Now the Ajax client library is interesting because it really does bring all the object-oriented concepts to the JavaScript world. Microsoft has written a client-side library that gives us the ability to define classes, namespaces. Maybe you need to register a class with a namespace. You can do that. Everything's contained in this root level sys namespace. They use sys because it distinguishes it from the system namespace which we have in the normal .NET framework. Keep in mind JavaScript is something that we're using on the client side here for Ajax programming. Maybe you want to register interfaces or enums, or you want to say this class implements this interface, right? And of course you can do all of that with the type class, which is another JavaScript class that Microsoft defined in this Ajax client library. A lot of common functions are used to working with in .NET, like working with arrays, working with strings, string builder, page load event handler. They're already created for you with this Ajax client library that Microsoft created. And again, like I said before, initially it was small. There wasn't much included when the Ajax framework was released with 1.0. They've continued to add many other classes that we can use. Something to get used to, this $ character. Get used to using the $ character for these shortcuts. Like for example, when you're writing your JavaScript, instead of typing the full get element by ID, you can just say $get. And they already have this shortcut, if you will, defined in Ajax client library, making your life easier. Add handler, remove handler, right? Or remove handlers. The find will help you find certain controls that might be on the page if you need to manipulate them. There's a lot of other shortcuts you can use, and there's a lot of other great functions. Simple things like the toString method. You need to convert something to a string, you can call toString off of it, and that's something else that's available off this client library. Now, something to keep in mind, guys, there's a lot of demand for your skills as a web developer. You have to know HTML, you have to know CSS, you have to know JavaScript, you have to know .NET, C# or VB. You have to know the ASP.NET programming model. I mean, we have a separate week-long class in Intertech which just covers ASP.NET, and that's with the full understanding that you do understand .NET itself. We have a complete C# and VB courses as well, which take a week. You may also need to know MVC, which is the future of ASP.NET in my mind. From what I'm seeing, everybody's going the MVC route. Developers must also understand Ajax programming. You must know how to use that XML HTTP request object, and how, of course, the Ajax framework from Microsoft makes it easier for us to do this Ajax programming. Developers must fully understand events, defining events, subscribing or unsubscribing from your events. You must know how to do this on the client side as well as on the server side. So there's a lot of skills that you must know to create these custom controls in Ajax. Now first off, if you're going to create a custom Ajax server control, you also have to know how to create a custom server control itself, whether or not you're doing Ajax programming. And this means you're going to define yourself a class which inherits either from the control class or the web control class, depending on whether or not it's going to have a user interface. Control, of course, is the base class for web control, and if you inherit directly from control, chances are good you're not doing much with the user interface. You're not working with styles and things of that nature. Whereas web control, well, then you are using some styles. You may want to use some inherited styles or make manipulations to them yourself. Okay. Now, there's a lot of different attributes that are used when you define your own custom control. And I'm actually going to show you an example of a custom control. This is something that we cover in the ASP.NET course. At the class level, you're going to define several different attributes, specifically how your control is going to behave and how it's going to appear in the designer. Also, at the property level, you're in control of what properties are going to appear in the property window in Visual Studio. A couple of popular methods we like to override: render contents and create child controls. These two methods here can actually be overridden, and then of course you can put your own custom content in, your own custom control for exactly what HTML you want to be emitted out to the client. Also note that you can include your own custom JavaScript that runs in the web browser. And the reason I say aha in there is that basically is the way that we can go ahead and create our own custom Ajax code. Okay? Now, taking a look at an example, notice I'm going to talk about the test repeater web control. Well, I'll come into Visual Studio here, and you'll notice I've got this myRepeater, and here's one called myRepeater.cs, and inside of here I have a namespace called TextRepeater Web Control. I've also got this class declaration for myRepeater, but you'll notice that it's inheriting from a class called Web Control. This is a default declaration you get when you create a custom web server control in Visual Studio. I've also got these attributes here. Default property, this will be the default property that's selected in the property window when this control is dragged and dropped onto a form. Toolbox data, this is information that's going to show up at the very top of the web page using that register directive. Note how it says run it equals server, and then I've got this curly brace, zero curly brace in here twice. That's going to be for the tag prefix. I've also got a toolbox bitmap specified here. You see, once I create my own custom control and compile this into a DLL, once I add it to the toolbox, this is the image that's going to appear. TextRepeater web control.myrepeater.bmp, which if I go take a look at that image, there's a cool little frog logo here. Notice it's 32 by 32. It has to be either 16 by 16 or 32 by 32. There's a lot of strict requirements for getting this image to actually appear on the control. Note the name of the image as well. It has to be the namespace.class.bmp. There's a lot of crazy requirements. And these, of course, are all specified with these attributes above the class declaration. Now, in my custom control, you'll notice that I have a couple of private fields here. One's an integer, one's a color type. Notice it's called iTextRepeatCount and cColorText. And, of course, I have my own custom properties as well. Now mind you, these properties here like text repeat count, text color, text, these guys are all going to show up in the properties window when somebody drags and drops this control from the toolbox onto the designer form. And I'm in control of what's going to appear. For example, if there's going to be a description at the bottom of the properties window, and if they sort by category with their properties, this is the category called InterText. I've got this third property for text. They already give you this automatically when you create a custom control in Visual Studio. And this one's just using ViewState to store the state information. I also did an override on that render contents method, and notice they're giving us this great HTML text writer. Based on that, I'm using the output to actually go ahead and write out this information. Okay, so when I actually go use this thing, let's say I go to default.aspx. Nah, that's not the right one. I think we said test.aspx and default.aspx. Okay. Let's go to test. and default 3. Here we go. This is default 3, and what I had done here is I dragged and dropped from the Intertech control section. I created my own section right here in the toolbox. Notice my icon showing up. I'm getting a little frog icon. And then in the designer, I dragged and dropped this onto the form, and you notice the register directive. Assembly equals, namespace equals, tag prefix equals Intertech. I can specify what prefix I want. And then down here, you can see the ID, my repeater 1, the text is test data, text color is medium blue, and text repeat count. These are the 3 properties that I specified back over here. There's text repeat count, here's text color, and this of course is text. And you can also see those in the properties window. So here's that text property, text color, and text repeat count. Now note that I have them sorted alphabetically. If I wanted to sort them by category, note that they're showing up inside of the Intertech category. Finally, note that I can go to the design view and actually see this control. Now if I wanted to throw another one on the form, just drag and drop it right onto the form from the toolbox. And initially you're not going to see anything. That's because you don't have any text set up for that control. So I'll put some data here, like I'll just put my first name in here. And then I'll set text repeat count to 5. There we go. See how 5 of them are showing up? And maybe I want to choose a cool color here. Like, medium slate blue. How about medium violet red? There we go. And you can see how they're actually showing up on that particular page then. Change this at design time to 2. And now we should have only 2 of them showing up. Try that again. Oh, I guess I modified that one. I wanted this one to be 2. So let's go ahead and choose my repeater 2. Change this guy to 2. By the way, did you notice down here at the bottom, allows you to set repeat count? That's the description, right? Back over here, that was the actual description we're setting up. That was the other attribute here. Now, if you understand how to create a custom server control like I just did, and how it actually emits this custom HTML through this render contents method, then you're finally able to go ahead and discuss how do we create a custom AJAX control. All right, that's just taking it to the next level. So I've got my render contents, and you know one thing I didn't do, hey, view in browser. So I go ahead and view it in the browser. And of course there I have the custom text showing up, and of course I better view source. And here I can see these 2 different span tags that are being emitted out into the HTML, right? Of course we know that all those cool properties I created in my custom server control ultimately have to equate to standard HTML and standard CSS styles, because that's what all web browsers understand. If you're emitting out HTML that is specific to a web browser, it's basically useless in the public world domain because everybody's got every different type of browser installed. Now, as you can see down here in the bottom, I've got 2 different versions of IE, Mozilla Firefox, Safari, Opera, Google Chrome, and any other type of browser if I get my hands on it. You know, Flock might be another one you're testing. So this shows us how we can create our own custom server control. But I also had another example, test.aspx. Let me go to this other control that we have here. This one's a custom web server control, but he does something else. This one's called Update Panel Animation, and he works with the AJAX Update Panel so that if some kind of interaction occurs where it makes an update to the server side, it's going to draw a line around that entire Update Panel box. And it's going to, of course, use CSS to do this. Now, some things that it needs to be aware of is it needs an ID of whatever update panel it's going to be modifying. It's going to need to know what border color to use and whether or not to even bother doing this animation in the first place. So we have 3 private fields here and, of course, 3 public properties just like before, border color, the update panel ID, and whether or not to animate. But also, very important here, on the pre-render event, it actually goes ahead and adds this JavaScript which is going to be sent to the page. Now this is important. This is how we can actually be in a little bit more control. This is how we can add JavaScript which can do our AJAX programming from the client side, if you will. For example, notice that we go ahead and use this find control method to go find our update panel based on whatever ID that we have. Then we build this gigantic string, which we're going to call script. We're using string.format to build it, with all of this JavaScript that's going to run on the client side. We're going to the sys namespace, using the application class, and calling add load. Now mind you, sys, that's that root level namespace in the Ajax client-side network. This is the JavaScript that Microsoft wrote in their JavaScript libraries. And adding this load of a function, sender and args, border animation, panel element here, and it's adding all of this script that's going to be included with the page when it's sent actually off to the client side. Then we finally register this as a startup script using the script manager control on a given page. Now keep this in mind, if we're going to have a page that has this control on it, it must have the script manager dragged and dropped onto the page first. The script manager will also guarantee that all of the Ajax client-side libraries are downloaded first, and then our custom JavaScript will run. And they'll be downloaded after, of course, the Microsoft Ajax client-side libraries run. Now back over on my website 2, if I go to my Solution Explorer and open up Test, this guy actually takes advantage of that. This guy is actually going to use that custom control called the Update Panel Animation with Client Resource, and he's going to go ahead and draw a line around that update panel every time somebody interacts with that update panel. Here's our required script manager, and we have a script reference. We're referencing off the text repeater web control this particular JavaScript file, text repeater web control.updatePanelAnimation.js. Again, keep in mind with JavaScript, everything's case sensitive and everything's got to be exact or it's just not going to work. In my update panel, I've got a very simple calendar, a button, and a label control. If any of these are clicked or interacted with and they cause a post back to the server, it's going to go ahead and use this update panel animation because we set animate to true. We set the border color, of course, to medium orchid, and this is the update panel that it's attached to. So if I go ahead and view this in a browser, you'll notice if I just click on a date right within the calendar control that we got that purple line that went around the actual update panel. Maybe I click on the button control and I get the current time. Again, it's doing Ajax to do that, but because of my JavaScript, which I've downloaded and included in the page, it's actually going ahead and running that code on the client side. And if I go ahead and view source, you can see that I've got my standard JavaScript here, which is included with all of our ASP.NET pages. But then I've got all of this stuff here, the script resource, which is referring to the ASP.NET Ajax client-side framework as well, off of website 2. And of course, all these special tags, which ASP.NET is entirely in control of. Got our page request manager, the PRM. He's the unsung hero of all of our Ajax client-side library. He's the one that allows us to subscribe to certain events that happen on the client side. And of course, we can see we're getting an instance of the page request manager and calling update controls of that update panel. Here, of course, is a calendar control with all those ridiculous dates on there. And then we can see this add load function. The one that we added as JavaScript is actually appearing as part of the page. And this is what I wanted to really show you, how we can programmatically add client-side script that's going to run with Ajax using the Ajax framework. Okay? I know there's ways we can just add JavaScript to a particular page off the page object. You can always just say register script. But this is a way of adding script that can be used with the Ajax framework. Okay? So there's that. Now, creating a simple ASP.NET Ajax control, one of the things you'll notice is that you'll create a class that inherits from script control. And if you take a look at the script control class, that actually inherits from web control, and it forces you to implement the iScript control interface, which requires you to have these two methods: get script descriptors and get script references. Get script descriptors, that's how you register your own properties, register your own enums and other types on the client and on the server side. The other one, get script references, is specifically how to just register the scripts for the client side that should be downloaded automatically. There's also a resource file, the resx, that's the XML version of a resource file, that ensures all your resources are contained within that custom control, that they're not external. They'll automatically be compiled in as an embedded resource. So for example, let's say I go over to Visual Studio and I create a brand new project. Right? New project. And inside of here, I get to choose wherever I'm going to create it. And I'm going to choose an Ajax server control. Here, of course, is the other one, the server control extender, if I want to extend an existing control. But if I just go ahead and choose to create an Ajax server control and click OK, notice what we're given here, guys. First off, we do have that class called server control 1. That's the default one that they've given us. And it does indeed inherit from script control. And if you just hit the F12 key, which is the same as going to definition, you can see that it does inherit from web control and requires us to have this iScript or implement iScript control. And that, of course, this interface here, if I hit F12 again, requires us to have these two methods here, getScript descriptors and getScript references. In other words, these two guys right here. Sure enough, right down here, the only thing that's in this control is this getScript descriptors and getScript references. And basically what you can do with this descriptor object, for example, if we wanted to go ahead and add our own custom properties, events, script property, add component property, add element property, we can take advantage of these methods to go ahead and programmatically do that. And then, of course, they're returned. Likewise, down here, you can go ahead and register your own custom JavaScript files. So for some reason you want to also include some other JavaScript files that are going to be doing Ajax programming with the framework, you can go ahead and include those right here. Notice here that we're returning a new script reference for client control 1. And that's this guy right here, right? This JavaScript file. And here's some basic source code that can help you get going with how do you set up the initialize event and the dispose event and their event handlers, right? One other file we do have is that resource file, and like I said, you can go ahead and add in whatever type of resource you want, whether it be a new string, an image, an icon, a text file, maybe an XML document. And remember, everything is going to be compiled directly into your given assembly because you made it as part of a resource, which is important. Now, this is a lot of code, and if you decide to create an Ajax custom control this manner, it's going to be a lot of coding from scratch. And you better know what you're doing. It may be preferred that you find a working example and then base it off of that and make modifications to it. Now the other type of control that we do have is, of course, our Ajax server control extender. And I'll go ahead and add that guy. And you notice he's almost identical as far as having the getScript descriptors, getScript references, and they do roughly the same thing. But keep in mind, the whole idea of an extender control is not to exist as a control itself, but to just modify the behavior of an existing control that it's going to attach to. Also notice that this guy inherits from extender control class. And if you go to definition there, he actually inherits directly from control, but requires you implement this specific interface, the iExtender control, which has basically those same two basic methods for getScript descriptors. But note that the getScript descriptors needs to know what your target control is. In other words, what control is this extender attached to? Right? So again, it's a little bit different, but it's still relatively similar as well. Now, one example I'd like to show you guys is if I go into the Ajax library beta. If you go into here and open up this beta samples solution, you can actually see a little bit more sample code that shows you how you can actually go ahead and register web server control, an Ajax custom web server control. Here we have a class called ImageView, and this control, of course, is just meant to display an image as an Ajax control. Notice how it's inheriting from script control. Scrolling down further, we do have some public properties here for data, data provider, fetch operation, fetch parameters, and auto fetch. Now down here, this is the stuff I wanted to show you. Here we have that getScript descriptors method, and of course with this descriptor object, you can see how we're adding a script property. This is a property that's going to be declared on the client side, in other words. And then we have some other properties which are being declared automatically on the server side. And of course the new yield function, which is introduced with .NET 2.0, will automatically return them as it iterates through. It returns the enum for them. Down here, this one is still only registering one JavaScript file, image view. And that's exactly what this is returning, this guy down here. Now here we actually have some JavaScript or some client-side script that's going to be returned to the client. And notice how we're setting the inner HTML equal to this span tag if we're in browse mode, versus in template mode we're actually returning this inner HTML. Just showing you some different examples of what you can do, and if you download this Ajax beta library, you get all of this sample code that you can go ahead and play with and get a little more practice with working with. Creating a control, remember, don't start from scratch. Find any working example on the internet. If you go to www.asp.net, click on the Ajax tab, there's plenty of free tutorials that will actually help you understand how to create your own custom Ajax controls. There's also some walkthroughs on MSDN and even on that same site I just mentioned that you can go ahead and follow to create your own custom controls. Usually you're going to inherit from an existing web control, inheriting some functionality or some custom user interface, but it's certainly not required. Also keep in mind, creating an extender may be much easier and actually is preferred than creating a full-blown your own custom server control, because some of the UI is already going to be there. You're not recreating the wheel, you're just adding a little bit of extra custom behavior to an existing control. Now, Ajax Extender, I already showed you how to do that. Notice how they, of course, inherited from the extender control base. Some final thoughts here on this presentation. I'm going a little long here. Visual Studio 2010 Beta 2, definitely download and play with this. I'm much happier with Beta 2 than I was with Beta 1. Beta 2 is less buggy, less prone for crashing, what I found. It's also much faster. Stretching windows and such, I found that Beta 2 just seems to be performing a lot quicker for me. I can't wait till it actually comes out with the official release. They're deciding not to make a 64-bit edition of Visual Studio 2010. They said they're going to stick with the x86. That'll run just fine in 32-bit mode on 64-bit systems like I'm currently running. And of course, Visual Studio 2010 will include support for MVC. And there is some Ajax MVC scripts that are going to be included as well. Keep in mind, jQuery is going to be the scripting library for us to learn and get very comfortable with. And of course, jQuery also supports a little bit of MVC programming as well. There's also some Ajax. There are a lot of the same Ajax templates that were in Visual Studio 2008 are still there in Visual Studio 2010, and a lot of things that you're learning and working with now in Visual Studio 2008 are also still there in 2010, except for jQuery and the support for MVC right out of the box. Visual Studio 2010 is it's nice to work with. It's written in WPF, and of course Microsoft, eating its own dog food, is making WPF more and more performant, and that's something else that we as developers are going to have to get comfortable with. So, my final thoughts here. This is intense programming. There's a lot of programming involved. You really do have to understand .NET programming. You have to understand JavaScript programming. You may or may not want to go this route for your own custom Ajax programming. You may want to stick with the XML HTTP request. The most dangerous programmers I know out there are the ones that say, this is the only way I'm ever going to do something. The best programmers always look at all the options and find out what's going to be the simplest for whatever problem they're currently working on. Many different programming skills required. There's a lot of time required. Working with the custom controls in Ajax, even if you're not doing Ajax, even if you're just creating custom controls, you have to be patient to get it all to work. As I state there in little quotes, all the planets have to align. Yeah, it's really easy to screw this up. If your attributes are off in your custom control, if you reference JavaScript, or if your JavaScript wasn't written correctly before you go ahead and add it to your control to send to the client, it's not going to work. Everything does have to be exact. And keep in mind, whenever you're doing any type of web programming, you've got to make sure that you test this on multiple browsers as well. Take a look at Microsoft's JavaScript libraries, specifically the Ajax libraries. Learn those and take advantage of those functions. Again, the best way to learn that is find some existing code, some samples, or just peruse through the .debug versions of the JavaScript files. Make sure, of course, you understand JavaScript programming, specifically object-oriented JavaScript programming. I know JavaScript is generally thought of as a prototype language where you don't actually define classes and inheritance. But with the Ajax client-side library, it actually supports all of that, adding classes to namespaces, registering them, and things of that nature. You're going to have to play around a little bit with the Ajax client-side library, and the source code is all available. The resource list, well, a few books I'd like to recommend. One, anything you're doing with ASP.NET Ajax, this green book from Manning. I'm just amazed at all the information that's inside of here. It gives you fantastic information with working with the Ajax library on the client side and also with the controls. But keep in mind that it was based on the Ajax library 1.0, not .NET 3.5. And that's why I have the next books listed. They're the ASP.NET 3.5 Ajax book. The professional one from ROX is a pretty good book. That talks about the client-side library also as creating custom controls. I've got some links on here, such as ASP.NET/Ajax, the Codeplex site, and then the Ajax blog, which is actually the team blog for the folks that originally came up with the Atlas product. And then Scott Guthrie just continues to amaze me with all the information he knows about ASP.NET, and he's always working on something. He's always working with the latest web technologies from Microsoft. A third book I'd like to recommend is from Addison Wesley. And this book here actually has a lot of information about creating custom controls. And notice it's based on .NET 3.5. I really like this book in conjunction with the green book over here. The green book is going to give you a lot of the information about the JavaScript side of things, and this one's going to give you a lot of information on the server side and how to add JavaScript to be sent to the client. So these are a couple of books that I highly recommend. Now, I asked some discussion questions for the folks that attended when I was at Microsoft giving the presentation. And how many are creating custom controls? Well, there wasn't that many, to be honest. Not many people are doing it. And I think that's because of the difficulty. This is not easy. And sometimes, especially if people have experience with other forms of web programming, especially if it's been in JavaScript and what other languages, they may just jump back to that XML HTTP request object, giving them more control on the client side. Well, hopefully things are going to get simplified here. Maybe there'll be some more examples as time goes on. That's what I'm hoping for as a developer myself. And there's more examples that I can borrow from, if you will. I've also talked to some other developers that said the Ajax Control Toolkit was great, so long as you're in Internet Explorer. But you go to try them on other browsers and they weren't nearly as successful. Now there's a lot of different resources from Intertech. You can check things out. Like this is one of the YouTube videos right now that I'm currently recording that you're currently listening to. But there's several other ones available on that. We've also got white papers and PDFs from Intertech. Hopefully you're on our email list and we can send you emails, current technology that we've been working with. And we always like to hear from you folks to see what you'd like training on. There's actually a link right on our homepage in the lower right corner. If you could take a little survey with us, that'd be great, and tell us what we should be developing our classes for. Intertech, of course, offers, mostly we've been offering day classes. We haven't offered them any night classes just because there hasn't been much of a demand. But at the same time, we've also offered virtual training. So if you want to sit at home or sit at work and take training, you can do that as well. We'll mail you the books, and I know for a fact they also include some other goodies along the way, like a bunch of little snacks and things of that nature. And you can also follow along right with our class. We've got some amazing boards, classroom training boards at school where I can just drag and drop, or I can draw right on the board, and you'll see it on your screen. We use WebEx for training primarily. Intertech is a training company, but they've also got an awesome consulting division. So keep that in mind for your division, what you're working with. And if you guys need some consulting help, by all means contact Intertech. And basically, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. I hope I gave you some neat ideas or something to think about. I spent a lot of time here, but hopefully this is something that you guys can use. There's the slides again that you can currently download my PDF for this slide deck right here. And you also have my email address, davin@mndeveloper.com or davin@intertech, either one. You can go ahead and contact me. And that should be about it then. All right, thanks a lot.